World War II. It was, without a doubt, the biggest, deadliest, most destructive war in all of human history. We're talking over 30 countries, an estimated 55 million people killed. It's just a staggering thing to get your head around. So, how do you even start to make sense of it? Well, that's what we're going to do right now. We're going to break this massive event down into a clear story. Okay, let's dive in.
We've broken it down into 5 acts. First, we'll look at the seeds of the conflict, then the lightning war that kicked everything off. After that, we'll see how the tide began to turn, how the walls closed in on the Axis powers, and finally, what kind of new world and new war was born from the ashes.
All right, so to really understand why World War II happened, you can't start in 1939. You actually have to go back to the end of World War I, because believe it or not, the seeds of the Second War were planted in the peace treaty of the First. That peace treaty was the Treaty of Versailles. And look, it was sold as justice for the winners, but for Germany, it was a total national humiliation. It forced them to accept all the blame for the war, pay a crushing amount of money, give up territory, and shrink their military to almost nothing. This wasn't about creating a lasting peace. It was about punishment. And it left a deep, dangerous anger simmering in Germany. Then, as if things weren't bad enough, the Great Depression hit. It absolutely crippled Germany. The economy collapsed. People lost their jobs, their life savings. Their money became so worthless that people were literally using stacks of it as firewood because it was cheaper than buying wood. So you can imagine, people completely lost faith in their government. And right into that chaos, into that despair, steps Adolf Hitler. He gave the German people someone to blame, and more importantly, a powerful vision. He promised to tear up that hated Treaty of Versailles, to expand Germany's borders for living space, and to make Germany proud and powerful again. And that's the thing you gotta understand. He wasn't just another politician, he was selling a return to greatness, and people were desperate to buy it. With Hitler in charge, those promises quickly turned into action. Germany started rearming big time, and the world was about to get a terrifying lesson in a brand new kind of warfare that would change everything. See, this was not going to be the slow, miserable trench warfare of World War I. No, this was blitzkrieg, lightning war. It was all about speed, shock, and overwhelming force. The whole idea was to hit the enemy so hard and so fast with planes, tanks, and infantry all at once that they couldn't even react before it was too late. So, after making a shady deal with the Soviet Union to make sure he wouldn't have to fight on 2 fronts, Hitler was ready. On September 1, 1939, German tanks rolled across the border into Poland. Britain and France had to respond. They declared war on Germany, and just like that, the Second World War was on. And you could see just how devastating this blitzkrieg strategy was almost immediately. Denmark, Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, they all fell incredibly fast. But the real shocker? France. I mean, this was a country that held Germany off for 4 long years in World War I. This time, they were completely overrun in just 35 days. It was just unbelievable. But Hitler's war machine wasn't invincible. When he turned his air force, the Luftwaffe, on Great Britain, he finally hit a brick wall. Protected by the English Channel, Britain's Royal Air Force fought like heroes in the sky and stopped the invasion cold. This was Hitler's first major defeat, and it was a huge deal. It sent a message to the whole world: the Germans can be beaten. Okay, so that victory proved the Axis wasn't unstoppable. And as the war expanded to become a truly global conflict, the whole momentum of the thing started to shift. In fact, between 1942 and 43, 3 absolutely decisive battles would happen that would completely turn the tide of the war. I mean, you have to remember, by the middle of 1942, Germany and Japan controlled these vast empires. It really looked like they were on an unstoppable roll. But that was all about to change. 3 battles in 3 totally different parts of the world were about to shatter that illusion of invincibility for good. First up, on the Eastern Front, Hitler made the massive mistake of invading the Soviet Union, and his army got stuck in a brutal meat grinder of a battle for the city of Stalingrad. The Soviets just refused to give up. They eventually surrounded the entire German Sixth Army and destroyed it. This was a catastrophic defeat for Germany, one they never, ever fully recovered from. At the same time, halfway across the world in the Pacific, Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor had woken up the sleeping giant. And at the Battle of Midway, the U.S. Navy pulled off a stunning victory. They sank 4 of Japan's most powerful aircraft carriers. It was a crippling blow that pretty much ended Japan's ability to dominate the Pacific Ocean. And turning point number 3 happened in the deserts of North Africa. At the Battle of El Alamein, British and Allied forces finally beat back the German and Italian armies. This victory was crucial because it secured the Mediterranean and, importantly, gave the Allies a launch pad for their next big move, the invasion of Italy. So, with those 3 huge victories, the tide had officially turned. It was a total game changer. From this point on, the Axis powers were on the back foot, playing defense, as the Allies began to squeeze them relentlessly from every single direction. The walls were closing in. And this really shows you the impossible situation Germany was in. I mean, just look. In the east, you've got the massive Soviet army grinding them back toward Berlin. In the south, the Allies have invaded Italy and knocked Mussolini out of the war. Germany was now fighting a brutal 2-front war, and a third one was about to open up. That third front, of course, was D-Day. On June 6, 1944, the Allies launched Operation Overlord, the biggest seaborne invasion in the history of the world. Millions of soldiers stormed the beaches of Normandy in France. After years of Nazi occupation, the beginning of the end, the liberation of Western Europe, had finally started. Meanwhile, on the other side of the planet, the U.S. was pushing closer to Japan with its island-hopping campaign, and the fighting was just unbelievably brutal. Tiny little islands like Iwo Jima and Okinawa became the sites of some of the bloodiest battles of the war. The Japanese fought desperately, even resorting to kamikaze suicide attacks, but nothing could stop the American advance. Back in Europe, the end was coming, and it was coming fast. The Allied armies were racing in from the west, and the Soviets were closing in from the east. In April of 1945, Soviet soldiers were fighting in the streets of Berlin itself. Cornered in his bunker, Hitler took his own life. A few days later, on May 8th, Germany officially surrendered. The war in Europe was finally over. But it wasn't completely over. One major Axis power was still fighting. Japan, even though they were facing certain defeat, absolutely refused to surrender. And this pushed the United States to make one of the most difficult and, frankly, world-altering decisions in human history.
American military planners believed that a full-scale invasion of Japan would cost hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of lives on both sides. So to avoid that horrific scenario, the U.S. decided to use a brand new, terrifying weapon. In August 1945, they dropped atomic bombs on the cities of Hiroshima and then Nagasaki. Faced with that kind of unimaginable destruction, Japan finally surrendered.
And the world that emerged from the rubble was completely different. The old European empires were shattered, and into that power vacuum stepped 2 new rival superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. The United Nations was formed to try and prevent another world war. But really, as soon as the shooting in World War II stopped, a new kind of war immediately began, the Cold War. And that really leaves us with this final question. The war to end all wars clearly failed. So this war, World War II, was fought to stop tyranny and build a safer world. And while it did create things like the UN, it also unleashed the power of the atom and kicked off a 50-year-long standoff that brought us to the brink of nuclear war over and over again. So, did it really create a lasting peace? That's a question history is still trying to answer.